So here to talk through this Minesweeper Pentomino puzzle by John Bulten called Test Your Wits. You'll see the clues are themselves pentomino shapes W, I, and T, and so the theme comes from seeing that. One thing from having instructed a lot of Minesweeper Pentomino puzzles is recognizing 6 clues themselves are always very limiting. You'll never want a case where you just like have a diagonal cell that's unused across these, and you can't have like 2 of these together being used because that doesn't work. So 6s often look like 3 with 3, or the V shape works around them with a single corner. And so that's something to always keep in mind. If we had just a lone 6 in the grid, we're actually lucky here. We've got a 6 with a 1, and that means we can only take one of these 2 cells, which means we've got 5 other cells we absolutely have to take. And this pattern should more easily show you why, like you don't take this and leave off the corner. Here we have 2 pentominoes touching by a corner that are different. That's not allowed in the rules. So instead we can't take the middle cell, we've got to take the corner cell. That completes the 6 clue, completes this 1 clue. We're leaving ourselves 1 cell for this 3 to get completed. This 2 is completed. This 3 now has just these cells to take. This 3 actually now has 3 cells to take, and this 4 at the start had those 4 cells to take. So we've got fair amount of progress from just noting things we already knew in the grid. This 3 actually gets completed by taking that last cell, and we now have a Z in the grid that will mark off all these cells, force this cell for the 4. And we'll just mark off in their inventory we've got the Z used. This 4 clue back up top is actually already completed here, so we've got this pattern with this 4 taking those over. These 3 cells are part of pentomino, but they're never reaching to this because that's going to be too large and touch to another, so this is forced to be a P. If that's a P, it looks like we actually know something more in this upper right corner, which is we can't skip this cell because that puts another P in the grid, so we have to take this cell. And this could be a V, a T, an F, a U, lots of choices still. But at least marking the cell is something that's worth doing. This 3 clue now just has 1 more mine to take, so that means we got 3 mines here and 3 more over to the left. Whichever of blue is taken is going to put in a V, whether this V or that V, which means that around this clue, everything else is going to be marked off. And because of the progress we made at the top, this cell can't be part of its own pentomino. It has to join to these 3, and so the V is the one that comes from the top. This comes down, but doesn't want to come across because these are distinct pentominoes. So this marks in these cells. We now need to dodge. And so this comes down to put in a T next to an N. So let's mark, again, our shape inventory with what we've now completed. We've got the V in the grid, and looks like those 5 are good. This 3 is in. This 2 is completed. This 2 needs 1 more to get completed. This is marked off because it's diagonal to the pentomino we finished. This 0 has none of these cells used, and one first thing I think we can do around this 1 is recognize because of the clue to the right, you can't take the center cell because that's going to cause some problems with what's in there. That now sets up something, I think, across these 3s to this. So we're going to have 2 mines in this space, and that leaves behind a space for 1 mine down here. So we can mark that through and actually get this in the grid. We should now actually see something about then the remainders, and this is sort of something like this 3 wants to have something coming to the left or coming to the right, even if I didn't have these cells marked in yet. A problem would be taking the 2 middles, because then you would isolate basically going left or right from this grid. So instead of taking 2 middles, we always know we have to take the 2 outers with 1 more cell here, and that actually is compatible with what we already knew, which was down here we take this cell. So there's a pentomino here that takes either the cell or doesn't, pentomino here that takes this cell or it doesn't, but it's going to make this work out. And that's something that you could have seen, you know, when we were at this stage of the grid by seeing, well, you can't take these 2 and leave this one off because then this is going to touch diagonally. But I like that you can do this thinking on your own if you just recognize you've got to take the outers, not the inners, where you have these 3 clues working together to place shapes. And so that we've got this pattern as good stage to be. This pentomino looks like the most constrained because it's close to this pentomino. So how are those going to dodge? Let's say this pentomino reached out to like this cell, like took this path. That would immediately cause huge issues. So this cell looks very bad for this pentomino. If this cell is not part of this pentomino, it's also not part of that pentomino. So this is open, and this can't reach all the way over to this cell, so this at least has to come down to here. And that now means we're left with, let me go to a different color. We're left with 6 cells this pentomino can include, and it's helpful to recognize we always have to take this cell to be able to access the rest in that inventory, and we don't want a P shape in the grid, so we're not going to be able to form a 2x2 square. And so the only set of those 6 cells that works is to put an F in, That marks off these cells. It completes a Y pentomino over here. This F being done makes all these clues finished. Let's go back to our inventory. The F and Y are in. We're going to take one of these two cells, and that means we can't take this cell. We're going to take one of these remaining three, and that gives us two more over here. So we've got probably now less about the mine clues and more about the shapes we're left with and how they fit in. So let's look across the shapes we have. We've got the start of 3 in a kitty corner kind of snake shape. That looks like it'd be part of a W or part of an X. So this W, this X. That X is nice for this one clue, so it's worth keeping in mind. I guess we can ask, do we have another pentomino put down here? Well, right now we could actually put a U down here, so let's just keep that in mind while we come up to this upper right and say, well, what goes in here? If I took this cell, I'd put in a V, so it's not a V. I actually have already put in the T into the grid, the F into the grid, and the Z into the grid, so it's not this. So this is actually the U here. So the U is placeable. And if that's true, everything now that's left is in a 3x3 bounding box, and there's no other pentomino that fits in here. So if this one can't be reached from below, because the best we can do here is an I that doesn't get over to it, this has to take a cell from above, and so this is forced to be the X shape of the two that can fit in the grid. We're now left with an I, an L, and a W to place. If I took this cell, that very much means I want to put an L into the grid. That looks reasonable. If I took this cell, I'm putting this L into the grid, and then what I have to do is take this cell, and that looks like I'm putting another L into the grid, so that looks awkward. Another thing that we can think about is what we were saying about the shapes we already have is we've got to take two together in this column, and this is a good pattern for like a W to take two together in this column, again, where we have like a 3x3 bounding box requirement. This would also work for that kind of thinking. So there's a natural feel where taking two in this space is probably coming from a single pentomino and not like this pattern, because this can't work. We can't actually reach up to this cell anymore, and it looks like we actually can't reach into this cell anymore unless we're part of, actually no, there's no bent W shape that makes that work. So that two of these come together and from a W looks like it makes the most sense, but going back to what we'd said before, there is an elimination. If you make this an L, you make this an L. You've got two L's and no place for the I. So this being the L with a long stretch here of a long I is the only thing that works out for the two clues on the left. We're actually left with what we were just discussing, which is a space that takes two over here to put in the W, and we're through to the finish of this puzzle. So hopefully you enjoyed watching this video. Definitely John's a good sort of use of the WIT pentomino theme to set up the placement of the 12 shapes, some good interactions of big clues and small clues in different places where, like, as we got the cluster of the 3 clues down here, knowing that they had to split across into 2 pentominoes, some of that kind of logic's useful in this style. So it definitely played out here on my solve and left us with a limited set of shapes to then use. I think identifying the U up here to force the X over here was helpful to get our inventory down to just the I, L, and W, which made it pretty trivial to look through all the options that were left to finish the puzzle. So thanks for watching this video, and we'll see you again soon.